This billionaire offered a struggling waitress a deal she couldn't refuse. Marry him for 1 year in exchange for freedom from her crushing debt. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. From explosive secrets to high-stakes betrayal, their contract spirals into an emotional battleground. But the contract wasn't just about money. It was a gamble on love. Will they survive the chaos, or will this deal destroy them both? Stick around, because the ending will leave you shocked. I'm your host, Josh, and it's an absolute pleasure to share this story with you. The phone buzzed again, its vibration rattling against the chipped ceramic mug on Olivia's kitchen counter. She ignored it, focusing instead on the scribbled list of overdue bills spread out before her. Electric, water, rent, the essentials she could barely afford. The phone's persistent hum broke through her thoughts, and with a sigh, she picked it up. Unknown number. She didn't need to answer to know the voice on the other end would be curt, demanding, and impatient. Another creditor chasing money she didn't have. Her thumb hovered over the decline button before she silenced it and dropped the phone back on the counter. Olivia Hart had stopped counting the calls weeks ago. Breathe, Liv, she whispered to herself, rubbing her temples. One step at a time. But no mantra could lighten the weight crushing her chest. Between juggling 2 jobs and dealing with the aftermath of her mother's death, Olivia felt like she was constantly treading water, her legs growing weaker every day. Her shift at the diner dragged as usual, the hours crawling by in a haze of clinking dishes and forced smiles. The regulars didn't notice her exhaustion. They rarely looked past the coffee refills. But as she stepped into the alley behind the diner to toss the trash, her heart sank. There, leaning casually against the brick wall, was her landlord, Mr. Wilson. "Evening, Olivia," he drawled, his tone as slimy as the oil stains on the pavement. She stiffened. "What do you want?" "What I'm owed," he replied, his grin widening. "Rent's overdue again." "This is… what? The 3rd time this year?" "I told you I'm working on it," Olivia snapped, tightening her grip on the trash bag. Wilson took a step closer, his bulk blocking the dim light from the street lamp. "Maybe there's another way you can make it up to me. Something a little… creative." Her stomach churned, but she kept her voice steady. "I'll have your money by the end of the week." His grin faded, replaced by a sneer. "You've got 3 days, sweetheart. After that, you're out." He walked away, leaving her trembling in the cold night air. Across the street, Adrian Blackwood watched the exchange through the window of a quiet cafe. He didn't usually linger in public spaces. His world operated in boardrooms and private lounges. But tonight, something had drawn him to this unassuming corner of the city. And now, he was glad it had. Adrian's sharp blue eyes followed the petite waitress as she squared her shoulders and returned to the diner, her defiance in the face of that man catching his attention. "Is there a problem, sir?" the barista asked, interrupting his thoughts. "No," Adrian replied curtly, dropping a $50 bill onto the counter. He didn't wait for his change. Olivia's shift ended in the early hours of the morning, her body aching as she stepped into the cold. She hugged her jacket tightly around herself, the threadbare fabric doing little to block the wind. As she started toward the subway, a sleek black car pulled up beside her, its tinted window lowering just enough to reveal a familiar face. "Adrian Blackwood." "You," Olivia said, her steps faltering. "What are you doing here?" "Get in," Adrian said, his tone low and commanding. She blinked, her instinct to keep walking warring with her curiosity. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Because you need help, and I can offer it." Olivia's jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "Good," Adrian replied smoothly. "This isn't charity." Her heartbeat quickened, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Then what is it?" Adrian opened the door, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "A proposition." Against her better judgment, Olivia stepped closer, curiosity winning over caution. "What kind of proposition?" Adrian's lips curved into a faint smile. "Get in, and I'll tell you." The car's interior was pristine and impossibly luxurious, a stark contrast to the chaos of Olivia's life. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar, and soft music played in the background, though Olivia couldn't focus on the melody. She perched on the edge of the seat, her fingers clutching her bag tightly, as if it could shield her from whatever Adrian Blackwood had planned. Adrian sat across from her, completely at ease. His tailored suit, sharp jawline, and cold demeanor were almost intimidating. But Olivia refused to let him see her squirm. "You said you had a proposition," she said, breaking the silence. He studied her for a moment, as though calculating how much of the truth to reveal. Yes, but first, tell me, how long do you think you can keep going like this? Her jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Adrian replied, his voice smooth but firm, you're drowning. I saw what happened with your landlord. I know the look of someone with no way out. Her cheeks flushed, a mix of anger and embarrassment. I'm handling it. No, you're surviving, Adrian countered, leaning forward slightly. There's a difference. His words hit harder than she wanted to admit. Still, she refused to back down. Why do you care? I don't, Adrian said bluntly, his icy gaze holding hers. But I see potential, and I need someone in your position, someone with nothing to lose. She frowned, her heart pounding. What are you talking about? I need a wife, Adrian said simply. The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Olivia blinked, waiting for him to laugh or clarify, but he didn't. That's not funny, she said flatly. It's not meant to be, Adrian replied. This isn't about romance or sentiment. It's a business arrangement, one that benefits us both. Olivia stared at him, her mind spinning. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke, or worse, a trap. You think I'd marry you? A total stranger? You're not a stranger anymore, Adrian said smoothly. I know enough about you, and you're smart enough to consider your options. Her laugh was sharp and disbelieving. You're insane. Perhaps, he said, his tone unfazed. But consider this. You're buried in debt, and I can clear it. I need a wife for 1 year, and I'll pay you generously for your time. No strings beyond what's in the contract. No pretense of love. Why me? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Because I don't trust people in my world, Adrian said. They have agendas. You don't. You're outside of it, which makes you useful. Useful, Olivia repeated bitterly. So I'm just some tool to you? Yes, Adrian replied without hesitation. But you'll be a well-compensated one. You'll have your debts paid in full, plus a settlement to rebuild your life when the year is over. You'll walk away richer than you ever dreamed. Her stomach churned, his words both tempting and infuriating. And what happens after the year is up? You'll leave, Adrian said. And so will I. No strings, no drama, just a clean break. Olivia stared at him, her hands trembling slightly. Everything about this felt wrong, yet his offer dangled in front of her like a lifeline. Think about it, Adrian said, handing her a sleek black card with his name and number embossed in silver. But don't take too long. I don't have time to waste. The car stopped in front of her apartment, and Adrian opened the door for her. Why are you doing this? She asked softly, pausing on the curb. Adrian hesitated, his gaze dropping for a split second before meeting hers again. Because it's the only way to keep what's mine. Olivia spent the night pacing her tiny apartment, the card burning a hole in her pocket. His words echoed in her mind, tugging at her with every step. She thought about the mountain of bills on her table, the landlord's leering grin, and the endless cycle of shifts that barely kept her afloat. And then she thought about Adrian Blackwood, cold, calculating, and strangely honest. By the time the sun rose, she had made her decision. And the elevator ride to Adrian's penthouse was eerily quiet. Olivia clutched her bag, her palms sweaty as she stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked out of place, her thrifted coat and scuffed boots a glaring contrast to the sleek, modern surroundings. When the elevator doors opened, Adrian was waiting for her. You came, he said, his voice unreadable. Don't read too much into it, Olivia replied, stepping into the vast, glass-paneled living room. He smirked faintly. Follow me. Adrian led her to a marble dining table where a neatly typed contract waited. Olivia's breath hitched as she scanned the document, every word reinforcing the absurdity of what she was about to do. This outlines the terms of our arrangement, Adrian said, taking a seat across from her. You'll find everything is fair and binding. Olivia looked up at him, her throat dry. This still feels wrong. It's business, Adrian replied, his tone indifferent. Nothing more. Her pen hovered over the dotted line. She thought about the landlord, the creditors, and the life she wanted but could never have. And then, with a shaky breath, she signed her name. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning. Welcome to the deal, Mrs. Blackwood. The penthouse was more than Olivia had imagined, both in size and in its unsettling sterility. Every surface gleamed, from the polished marble floors to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The furniture was modern and expensive, but the space felt empty, devoid of life. "You live here?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief as she followed Adrian into the vast living room. "I exist here," Adrian corrected, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "There's a difference." Olivia glanced around, her gaze lingering on the abstract art pieces hanging on the walls. They were cold and emotionless, much like Adrian himself. "It feels like a museum," Adrian smirked faintly. "That's because it is. The gallery furnished most of it." "Of course it did," Olivia muttered under her breath, feeling more out of place with every passing second. Adrian led her down a long hallway lined with stark white walls to a spacious guest room. "This will be your space," he said, opening the door. The room was stunning. A plush, king-sized bed, soft lighting, and a view that rivaled the living rooms. Yet Olivia couldn't help but feel uneasy. "This feels excessive," she said, crossing her arms. "You'll get used to it," Adrian replied, his tone dismissive. "Dinner is at 8. Be ready." Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving her alone in the cavernous room. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, her bag still clutched in her hands. She had agreed to this, signed her name on the contract, and yet, she already felt like she was drowning in a world she didn't belong to. By the time Olivia made her way to the dining room, she had changed into the simple black dress Adrian's stylist had left for her. The table, long enough to seat 20, was set for 2, the silverware sparkling under the soft glow of the chandelier. Adrian was already seated, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when she entered. "You're punctual. That's good," he said, setting the phone aside. "Dinner at 8. Hard to mess that up," she quipped, taking the seat across from him. A server entered, silently placing plates in front of them. Olivia blinked at the artfully arranged dish, a small portion of something that looked too elegant to eat. "Is this food?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Adrian's lips twitched in amusement. "You'll find the portions more substantial by the 3rd course." Olivia stabbed at her plate with a fork, her appetite drowned by nerves. "So, is this how it's going to be? Quiet meals and pretending?" Adrian took a measured sip of his wine. "You'll attend events with me, wear what I provide, and say as little as possible. Beyond that, you're free to do as you wish." His detachment grated on her, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And what if someone asks about us? About how we met?" Adrian set his glass down, his gaze sharp. "They won't." Olivia frowned. "You can't control everything." "No," Adrian said, leaning back in his chair. "But I can control most things, including the narrative." And the following day, Olivia was jolted from her thoughts by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. The door to the penthouse opened, and in swept a woman with an air of icy confidence. "Martha," Adrian said, his voice tight. "Adrian," the woman replied, her tone sugary but insincere. Her sharp eyes landed on Olivia, and her painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be the fiancé." Olivia rose awkwardly, unsure whether to extend a hand or flee. "I'm Olivia," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Of course you are," Martha said, circling her like a hawk. "Adrian's been full of surprises lately. I suppose you're one of them." "That's enough, Martha," Adrian interjected, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Martha ignored him, her gaze still fixed on Olivia. "Tell me, dear, what's it like stepping into a world you've only ever seen on TV?" Olivia's cheeks burned, but she refused to let Martha see her squirm. "It's not so different," she said, lifting her chin. "Just shinier." A flicker of amusement crossed Adrian's face, but Martha's expression darkened. "Well," Martha said, adjusting her pristine coat, "enjoy it while it lasts." She left without another word, the sound of her heels echoing through the penthouse. If you are enjoying the story, help us by subscribing to the channel. And please leave a comment to let us know what you're thinking about the story. This is of huge importance to us. That evening, Adrian found Olivia standing by the windows, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared out at the city. "You handled her well," he said, joining her. "She hates me," Olivia said quietly. "She hates everyone," Adrian replied. "Don't take it personally." Olivia glanced at him, her voice tinged with frustration. "How can I not? She's your family." Adrian's expression hardened. "Martha isn't family. She's an obstacle, one you shouldn't waste your energy on." Olivia turned back to the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Maybe this was a mistake. Adrian's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "It wasn't. You agreed to this for a reason, Olivia. Don't lose sight of that." She didn't respond, the weight of his words settling over her like a storm cloud. And for the first time, Olivia wondered if she had truly understood what she was signing up for. The first public appearance came sooner than Olivia expected. A charity gala held by the Blackwood Foundation was to be their debut as a couple. Adrian insisted it was necessary, the kind of spectacle that would cement their story and silence any doubts about their engagement. Olivia stared at herself in the mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable. The stylist Adrian had hired had chosen a deep emerald gown that clung to her figure, its elegance far beyond anything she had ever worn. Her hair was swept into a sleek updo, and her makeup was flawless, accentuating her bright green eyes. But none of it felt like her. When Adrian entered the room, his reaction was subtle, a flicker of approval in his otherwise unreadable expression. "You'll do," he said, his tone casual as he adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. Her lips twitched in irritation. "Don't strain yourself with the compliments." Adrian smirked faintly. "Shall we?" The gala was held at a grand hotel, the ballroom shimmering with crystal chandeliers and gold accents. As they entered, Olivia felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Adrian's hand rested lightly on her back, a calculated gesture that spoke of possession rather than affection. "Smile," he murmured near her ear. "You're supposed to look like you belong." Olivia plastered on a smile, though her nerves churned beneath the surface. The crowd parted as Adrian guided her through, nodding and exchanging polite greetings with other attendees. It was a dizzying parade of wealth and power, the kind of world Olivia had only seen in glossy magazines. And she was an outsider, every glance and whisper reminding her of that fact. "Adrian Blackwood," a syrupy voice called, stopping them in their tracks. A statuesque woman approached, her designer gown flowing behind her like a cape. She extended a manicured hand to Adrian, her smile sharp and calculating. "Victoria," Adrian said smoothly, shaking her hand. "A pleasure as always." Her gaze shifted to Olivia, and her smile grew colder. "And who is this?" "This is Olivia," Adrian said, without missing a beat. "My fiancé." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile didn't falter. "Fiancé? My Adrian, you do move quickly." Olivia extended her hand, her grip firm despite the nerves racing through her. "It's nice to meet you." Victoria took her hand but barely shook it. "And what do you do, Olivia? Before this whirlwind engagement, I mean." "She was a writer," Adrian interjected smoothly, his voice cutting through the tension, "and a very promising one at that." Olivia's stomach tightened. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. "How fascinating," Victoria said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I suppose Adrian has a way of discovering hidden talents." Before Olivia could respond, Adrian stepped in. "Victoria, if you'll excuse us, we have other guests to greet." He guided Olivia away, his grip on her waist tightening slightly. Later, as the evening wore on, Olivia found herself on the balcony, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the stifling ballroom. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights, her thoughts racing. "Quite the show," a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned to see Victoria, a glass of champagne in hand, her smile as venomous as ever. "You clean up nicely," Victoria said, her tone light but laced with malice. Olivia didn't rise to the bait. "I could say the same for you." Victoria's smile faltered for a moment before she took a step closer. "You're an interesting choice for Adrian, so different from his usual type. Tell me, how did you manage to capture his attention?" Olivia met her gaze, her voice calm but firm. "Why does it matter?" "Because Adrian isn't the type to fall for someone out of the blue," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. "There's always a reason, and I intend to find out what it is." Olivia's chest tightened, but she refused to let Victoria see her nerves. "Good luck with that," Victoria chuckled, taking a sip of her champagne. "Enjoy your moment, darling. It won't last." Before Olivia could respond, Adrian appeared, his expression dark. "Victoria," he said coldly, "I think you've overstayed your welcome." Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation, but she stepped back with a sugary smile. "Of course. Have a lovely evening." As she disappeared into the crowd, Adrian turned to Olivia. "Are you all right?" Olivia nodded, though her voice was tight. "I'm fine. You don't look fine." She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just, this world. It feels like it's designed to crush people like me." Adrian's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability flickering across his face. "It's not easy," he admitted, "but you're stronger than you think." The unexpected tenderness in his voice caught her off guard, but before she could respond, he offered his hand. "Come inside," he said. "You shouldn't let people like Victoria ruin your night." Olivia hesitated for a moment before placing her hand in his, and as they stepped back into the ballroom, she realized that while Adrian's world might be cold and unforgiving, she wasn't entirely alone in it. The drive to Adrian's childhood home felt like entering a different world. The high rises of Manhattan faded into quiet suburbs, and then to winding roads lined with trees just beginning to shed their autumn leaves. Adrian drove in silence, his jaw tight as he focused on the road. Olivia studied him from the passenger seat, the tension in his shoulders more pronounced than usual. He hadn't told her much about why they were going, just that he needed to show her something. "Are you going to tell me what's waiting for us?" she asked, breaking the silence. "You'll see," he replied, his voice clipped. Olivia frowned but didn't press further. She had learned by now that Adrian would only talk when he was ready. The house was modest and unassuming, a stark contrast to the penthouse and luxury cars Adrian surrounded himself with. It sat on a quiet street, its faded paint and sagging porch railing, hinting at years of neglect. "This is where you grew up?" Olivia asked as she stepped out of the car. "For a time," Adrian said, his hands shoved into his coat pockets. She followed him to the front door, which creaked as he pushed it open. The inside was sparse but filled with remnants of a life long abandoned. A worn couch sat in the living room. A few faded photographs still hung on the walls, and the faint scent of dust lingered in the air. Adrian walked to the mantel, his gaze fixed on a small photo of a boy with dark hair and bright eyes. He picked it up, his fingers brushing the edge of the frame. "That's you," Olivia said softly, stepping closer. He nodded. "I was 10. My foster mother took this the day I won some spelling bee at school. She must have been proud." "She was," he said, his voice quiet. "She always said I'd go places, that I was smart enough to escape this life." Olivia hesitated. "What happened to her?" Adrian set the photo down, his jaw tightening. "She died when I was 16. After that, I bounced around from one foster home to another. I learned pretty quickly not to get too comfortable." Her chest ached at the rawness in his tone. "Adrian, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, turning to face her. "It's just the way things are. But this house, it's where I first felt like I had a real home, even if it didn't last." They spent the afternoon exploring the house. Adrian showed Olivia the creaky stair that always gave him away when he tried to sneak out, the closet where he used to hide his few prized possessions, and the small window he used to stare out of, dreaming of a life beyond this place. As they stood on the porch later, Olivia leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the quiet street. "Why bring me here?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to see that I wasn't always this," Adrian said, gesturing vaguely at himself. "The wealth, the control, the coldness. It's all armor. It's how I survived." Olivia looked at him, her heart twisting at the vulnerability in his expression. "You don't have to keep wearing it, you know." Adrian's lips quirked in a faint, humorless smile. Easier said than done. That evening, they sat in the tiny kitchen, eating takeout from the nearest diner. The space was cramped, the opposite of the penthouse, but Olivia found herself laughing for the first time in days. Adrian, for all his sharp edges, had a surprisingly dry sense of humor that crept out in moments like these. "You're different here," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Adrian looked at her, his blue eyes softer than usual. "Maybe this is who I really am." The weight of his statement hung between them, heavy, but not unwelcome. For the first time, Olivia felt like she was seeing the man behind the armor. And for the first time, Adrian allowed himself to be seen. Back in Manhattan, the transition back to their roles was jarring. The warmth of the house was replaced by the cold sterility of the penthouse, and Adrian's walls went back up. But Olivia couldn't forget the man she had seen in that quiet, dusty house, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was falling for him. The warmth they had shared at Adrian's childhood home seemed like a distant memory. Back in Manhattan, the cold sterility of the penthouse wrapped around Olivia like a cage. Adrian had retreated into his work, taking endless calls and spending hours in his office, while Olivia wandered the halls, unsure of her place in his world. She wanted to talk to him, to find the man she had seen at that little house, but every time she tried, he was unreachable, his walls firmly back in place. That it was Martha who shattered the uneasy silence. She arrived unannounced, sweeping into the penthouse like a storm. "Adrian!" she called, her voice sharp and commanding as she walked into the living room. Olivia froze, standing by the kitchen counter. She had been trying to distract herself with a book, but Martha's presence made her spine stiffen. Adrian appeared from his office, his expression tight. "Martha, this isn't a good time." "When is it ever with you?" she retorted, before her gaze landed on Olivia. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And there's the woman of the hour." Olivia set the book down and crossed her arms. "What do you want, Martha?" "To talk," Martha said, stepping closer. She was carrying a sleek leather folder, and Olivia's stomach churned at the sight of it. "Adrian, darling," Martha said, turning back to him. "Why don't you give us a moment? This won't take long." Adrian's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering between them. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it to both of us." Martha arched an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, she opened the folder and slid a stack of papers onto the table. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, her tone cool. Adrian picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the text. His face darkened. "Where did you get this?" "I have my ways," Martha said smoothly. "The inheritance clause was always going to be a challenge for you, Adrian. But did you really think I wouldn't notice your creative solution?" Olivia frowned. "What is she talking about?" Martha turned to her, her smile sharpening. "Oh, you didn't know? The clause was never about finding a wife. It was about control. And I've made sure the board understands that. Even if this little arrangement of yours looks legitimate, the inheritance is already out of your hands." Adrian's grip on the papers tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You don't have that authority." "Don't I?" Martha asked, her tone dripping with mock innocence. "You've underestimated me before, Adrian. You shouldn't make a habit of it." Later that night, Olivia sat alone in the living room, the tension from Martha's visit lingering in the air. Adrian hadn't said a word after Martha left, retreating to his office without so much as a glance in her direction. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what Martha had said. The deal had always felt transactional, but now it felt hollow, like everything she had sacrificed was for nothing. By the time Adrian finally emerged, Olivia was waiting for him. "Martha was right, wasn't she?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. Adrian stopped, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter." Olivia stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "It matters to me." She said, "The inheritance is out of your hands." Was this whole thing just pointless? It wasn't pointless, Adrian said firmly. It was necessary. "For what?" she demanded. "To save face. To buy yourself time." "What was I to you, Adrian? Just another piece in your game?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're overthinking this." "No," Olivia snapped, stepping closer. "I'm finally seeing it for what it is. I signed that contract because I thought it meant something. But you don't care, do you? Not about me, not about us. You care about control." His silence was deafening. "That's what I thought," she said, her voice trembling. She grabbed her coat and bag, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Adrian asked, his tone clipped. "Anywhere but here," she replied without looking back. "Because I can't keep pretending this is enough." Olivia returned to her old apartment in Queens, the one she had shared with her mother. It was empty now, stripped of furniture and life, but it was still hers. She sat on the floor, staring at the faded wallpaper, and let the tears fall. For the first time, she admitted to herself what she had been avoiding all along. She wasn't pretending anymore. She had fallen in love with Adrian Blackwood, and it was breaking her. The penthouse felt colder than ever without Olivia. Adrian sat at his desk, staring at the stack of papers Martha had left behind. Her threats, her manipulations, they all paled in comparison to the hollow ache in his chest. He had told himself he didn't need anyone, that opening up only led to pain. But now, for the first time, he realized how wrong he'd been. He needed Olivia. Across town, Olivia sat on the floor of her old apartment, her head resting against the wall. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of traffic outside. Her heart felt like it had been torn in two. One half still tethered to Adrian, the other trying desperately to pull away. Emma appeared in the doorway, her arms full of takeout containers. "You look like you need this," she said, setting the food down beside Olivia. "Thanks," Olivia murmured, but she didn't reach for the food. Emma plopped down beside her, her sharp eyes scanning Olivia's face. "All right, spill. What happened?" Olivia sighed, her voice heavy. "I left. Obviously," Emma said, gesturing to the empty apartment. "The question is why?" "Because it wasn't real," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "None of it was. The contract, the deal, me. I was just another move on Adrian's chessboard. Emma frowned. You really believe that? Olivia hesitated, her chest tightening. I don't know. Maybe. He keeps everything so locked up. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore. Emma placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe you should let him figure it out. If he really cares, he'll fight for you. Adrian didn't realize how much he had relied on Olivia's presence until she was gone. The penthouse felt too big, too quiet. Even his work, once his refuge, couldn't distract him. You look like hell, James said, stepping into Adrian's office uninvited. Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. What do you want? To talk some sense into you, James replied, dropping into the chair across from him. You're sulking. I don't sulk, Adrian said flatly. James smirked. Call it whatever you want. But you're sitting here, letting Martha win, and worse, you're letting Olivia walk away. The question is why? Adrian closed the laptop, his jaw tightening. It's not that simple. It is, James countered. You care about her. I've seen it. Hell, everyone's seen it. Except maybe her, because you're too damn stubborn to admit it. Adrian didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. James leaned forward, his voice softer now. You've spent your whole life building walls, Adrian. But here's the thing. Walls don't keep you safe. They keep you alone. Adrian's gaze dropped to the desk. He hated how much James's words hit home. So, James said, standing, what are you going to do about it? That night, Adrian found himself standing on the balcony, the city sprawling out before him like a glittering maze. He had always believed that control was everything, that vulnerability was a weakness. But Olivia had shown him otherwise. He picked up his phone, dialing the number he had memorized weeks ago. The next morning, Olivia was walking through her neighborhood when a familiar black car pulled up beside her. She stopped, her breath catching as Adrian stepped out, his tailored coat and sharp features, a glaring contrast to the worn streets of Queens. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice cautious. I needed to see you, Adrian said, his tone softer than she had ever heard it. Olivia crossed her arms, keeping her distance. You made it pretty clear where I stand. Why should this be any different? Adrian took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. Because I was wrong. She blinked, taken aback by the admission. I've spent my entire life pushing people away, he continued, his voice steady but raw. It was easier to keep everything locked down, to tell myself that I didn't need anyone. But you, his voice broke slightly. You changed that. You changed me. Olivia's throat tightened, but she kept her composure. And what happens when this gets hard, Adrian? When things don't go your way? Do you shut me out again? He shook his head. No, I'm done running, Olivia. From you, from my past, from myself. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise that I'll fight for you. For us. Her walls began to crack, the sincerity in his voice breaking through the doubt that had consumed her. And Martha? She asked. The inheritance? All of it? Let her have it, Adrian said without hesitation. None of it matters without you. Olivia searched his face, looking for any trace of deception, but all she saw was the man she had glimpsed in that tiny house, the man behind the armor. She took a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. I don't want to be a piece in your game, Adrian. I want to be your partner. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. You already are. For the first time in weeks, Olivia allowed herself to believe him. The Blackwood Foundation Gala was the event of the season. Manhattan's elite filled the grand ballroom, their laughter and chatter echoing beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Cameras flashed as society columnists captured every gown, every tailored suit, every carefully constructed smile. And at the center of it all was Adrian Blackwood, poised at the top of the grand staircase. For once, he wasn't thinking about appearances, strategies, or Martha's schemes. His focus was singular, and every step he took toward the stage carried the weight of a decision he should have made long ago. When he reached the podium, the room fell silent. Adrian's presence alone commanded attention, but tonight there was something different in his demeanor. His usual icy detachment had melted into something raw and vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian began, his voice steady but quieter than usual. Tonight, we celebrate the work of the Blackwood Foundation and the impact we've made. But before I say anything more, there's something I need to address, something far more important. The crowd murmured, a ripple of curiosity passing through the room. Adrian's gaze swept across the faces before him, his blue eyes sharp but sincere. I've spent my life building walls. Walls to protect myself, to keep people out. They helped me rise to where I stand today, but they also kept me from seeing what really matters." He paused, the room holding its collective breath. "Someone taught me that those walls weren't a shield. They were a cage, and that someone is Olivia Hart." Across town, Olivia sat on Emma's couch, her fingers curling around a cup of tea. She had been avoiding the gala, avoiding the news, avoiding anything that might remind her of Adrian. But Emma had turned on the live broadcast anyway. "Are you seriously not watching this?" Emma asked, gesturing toward the screen. "I don't need to," Olivia said, her voice resigned. "You might want to rethink that," Emma replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "Because it looks like your man is about to blow up his whole world for you." At the mention of her name, Olivia froze, her eyes snapping to the TV. Adrian stood at the podium, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "She taught me that love isn't about control or perfection," Adrian continued. "It's about vulnerability, about risking everything for something real." The camera zoomed in on his face, his expression raw and unguarded. "Olivia," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "if you're watching, I need you to know this. I love you. Not as part of a deal, not as a piece in some game, but as the person who taught me what it means to truly live." Emma let out a squeal, grabbing Olivia's arm. "Oh my God, did you hear that?" Olivia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She couldn't move, couldn't think. "You have to go to him," Emma urged, already reaching for her keys. Minutes later, Olivia found herself in the back of a cab, her thoughts racing as the city lights blurred past the window. By the time she arrived at the gala, her nerves were on fire. She stepped into the grand ballroom, the crowd parting as they noticed her. Every eye seemed to follow her as she made her way toward the stage, but Olivia barely noticed. Her gaze was fixed on Adrian. He was still standing at the podium, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers the moment she entered. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. And then Adrian stepped down from the stage, meeting her in the center of the room. "You came," he said softly, his voice trembling. "You called," Olivia replied, her lips curving into a small, hesitant smile. Adrian reached for her hands, his touch warm and steady. "I meant every word. I don't care about the inheritance, the contracts, or any of it. All I care about is you." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but she held his gaze. "And what happens if I stay? What happens when it gets hard?" Adrian's grip tightened, his voice firm. "Then we fight. Together. Because you're not just my partner, Olivia. You're my heart." Her resolve crumbled, and she let out a shaky laugh. "You're a damn fool, Adrian Blackwood. And I love you for saying so," he replied with a rare, genuine smile. The room erupted into applause as Adrian pulled Olivia into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise they had made. For the first time, Olivia felt like she wasn't stepping into Adrian's world. They were building one together. 1 month later, the penthouse felt like a completely different place. Gone were the cold, minimalist surfaces and lifeless decor. In their place were small but meaningful changes. A soft throw draped over the couch, plants lining the windowsills, and shelves filled with books Olivia had brought from her old apartment. She stood by the window, a mug of coffee warming her hands as she watched the sunrise over Manhattan. The view was breathtaking, but it no longer felt distant. It was hers now, just as much as it was Adrian's. "You're up early," Adrian said, his voice groggy as he walked into the room, barefoot and still in his pajama pants. She turned, smiling. "Couldn't sleep." He walked over to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're overthinking again, aren't you?" "Maybe," she admitted, setting her mug down. "This still feels surreal sometimes." Adrian cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "It's real, Olivia. I promise you that." Her lips curved into a small smile. "I know." Later that day, the penthouse buzzed with activity as Olivia and Adrian prepared to host their closest friends. It was a small gathering, just Emma, James, and a few others, but it felt monumental. Emma arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and her usual boundless energy. She wrapped Olivia in a tight hug, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You look disgustingly happy," Emma teased, glancing at Adrian, who was arranging a platter of hors d'oeuvres. "And I think Mr. Control Freak might actually be smiling." "What did you do to him?" Olivia laughed, nudging her friend. "It's a work in progress." Adrian glanced over, his lips twitching in amusement. "I can hear you, you know." "Good," Emma replied, smirking. "You should know we're all keeping an eye on you." Adrian shook his head, but there was no edge to his expression. As the evening went on, the penthouse filled with laughter and warmth. James pulled Adrian aside near the balcony, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You've changed," James said, studying his old friend with a mix of surprise and approval. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "And that's a bad thing?" "Not at all," James replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "It's good to see you happy, Adrian. You've earned it." Adrian glanced toward Olivia, who was laughing at something Emma had said. A rare softness crossed his features. "It's not about earning it. It's about not screwing it up." James chuckled. "Finally, you're learning." When the last guest had left and the penthouse was quiet again, Adrian and Olivia found themselves sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine between them. "I think that went well," Olivia said, leaning against his shoulder. "It did," Adrian agreed, wrapping an arm around her. She looked up at him, her expression turning serious. "Do you ever think about what's next? About where this goes from here?" "All the time," he admitted. "And honestly, I don't have all the answers. But I do know that whatever comes next, I want you with me." Her heart swelled, and she leaned up to kiss him softly. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Adrian smiled, pulling her closer. "Neither am I." As they sat together, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Olivia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy, but it had been worth it. Because this wasn't just Adrian's world anymore. It was theirs. A year had passed since Adrian and Olivia made their first public appearance together, and life looked very different now. The penthouse, once cold and uninviting, was now a warm, lived-in home. Its sharp edges had softened, reflecting the people who lived there, a couple who had learned together what it meant to truly love. Tonight, the living room buzzed with quiet energy. It wasn't a gala or a flashy affair, but a small, intimate gathering with the people who mattered most. Emma, James, and a few close friends sat around the room, sipping wine and sharing laughter. Olivia stood by the kitchen island, arranging the final touches on a charcuterie board. Emma hovered nearby, popping a grape into her mouth. "You've come a long way from waitressing and dodging landlords," Emma said with a grin. "How does it feel, Mrs. Blackwood?" Olivia smiled, shaking her head. "It feels good. Better than good." Her gaze flickered to Adrian, who was deep in conversation with James. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "You made him human," Emma said, following Olivia's gaze. "I think that might be your greatest accomplishment yet." Olivia laughed softly. "It's not all me. He wanted to change. He just needed a little push." "A little push?" Emma teased. "You tore down his walls like a wrecking ball. Don't be modest." Olivia grinned, but her heart swelled with gratitude. Borticourt. Later in the evening, as the guests said their goodbyes, Adrian and Olivia found themselves alone on the balcony. The city stretched out before them, glittering and alive. Adrian leaned against the railing, his hand brushing hers. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" she asked, turning to him. "The simplicity of your old life." Olivia considered the question, her gaze dropping to the city below. "I miss parts of it, but not enough to go back." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Not even the diner?" She laughed. "Especially not the diner." He smiled, taking her hand. "Good, because I don't think I could survive without you here." Her eyes softened. "You would, but I don't think you'd want to." "You're right," he admitted. "I wouldn't." Inside, Olivia's phone buzzed on the counter, a notification from her publisher. Her debut novel, an honest and deeply personal story about love and redemption, was officially a bestseller. She hadn't told Adrian yet. She wanted to savor the moment, to surprise him when the time was right. "Come inside," he said, tugging her hand gently. "Why?" she asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Because I want to dance with my wife," Adrian replied, pulling her close. She laughed, letting him guide her back into the living room. As they swayed to the soft music playing from the speakers, Olivia rested her head against Adrian's chest. She felt his heartbeat, steady and strong, and let herself relax completely. It hadn't been easy. The past year had been filled with challenges, misunderstandings, and the kind of growth that left scars. But it had also been filled with moments like this, moments where the world fell away, leaving just the two of them. "I love you," Adrian said quietly, his lips brushing her hair. "I love you too," Olivia replied, her voice full of certainty. The future was uncertain, but Olivia didn't fear it. She had Adrian, and he had her. Together, They had built something stronger than wealth or power. They had built a love worth fighting for. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription will show that I'm on the right path to bring you the best videos ever. Check this video out too. Meet Aria Fontaine, a fearless aerialist on a mission to find her missing sister, Allegra, who vanished under mysterious circumstances a year ago. When Aria receives a cryptic invitation to join the legendary Gilded Circus, she leaps at the chance.